You ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi there. My name's John from sunny South Africa. In fact, Richards Bay. You can look it up on the map. This is a lot of people have got ideas how to set up a Dragonflite. This is purely how I set mine up. It's not to say it's the right way, but through a lot of trial and error, I found that this is what works for me, and I'll try and explain my reasoning as I go along. I'm just demonstrating here with the B rig, and the first thing which I do is the deck plate here I put right as far back as it'll go. Now the reason for that, people say it adjusts the mast position. No, it doesn't. The mast goes through this hole at the top, and at the bottom of the well that it's in there, it's actually sitting in a little V, and that V allows the mast to go backwards and forwards. Now the problem we have, especially on a B rig, is you want a lot of forestay tension, but when you crank on the backstay, what happens is the mast gets a lot of pre-bend, and the only tool that you have to try and stop some of that bend, like on the 1 meter, is this little deck thing here. So by putting it as far back as we can, it acts like a little ram at deck level, which will help to keep the mast as straight as is possible. One of the things I do on all my cords here, I put little tags on it here so that you can use those to pull them off. And ditto, when you look at the backstay here, we've got the ring, the bowsy, and I've got this little thick cord which keeps the loop apart, and it just makes putting it on the thing there a lot easier. And a bit of string to keep the bung on. Most important, you don't want to lose that. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is just quickly connect the sheeting. B rig goes through the front hole, through the second hole, and just go underneath the elastic, underneath the sheeting horse, and connect it up to, shouldn't do that, but I do it. It doesn't give me any grief yet. One day it might. Now, what is very important for consistent results in setting it up is that I'm just going to switch on the transmitter. Switch on the back. Okay. So we have the boat rigged up here. Now you don't want sag in the forestay, and you want as much kicker tension on the leech of the sail here as possible. So you put on quite a bit of backstay. Now if you put on too much backstay, you're going to get a lot of bend in the mast. Your forestay dimension from the top hole to the front of the bow, there's a series of given dimensions which I will publish, which to me is the ideal length. Pulling on this backstay does not really increase that length because you've got a masthead rig. It does put a little bit of bend in it, and you can see, because you've got the backstay crane acting like a lever arm, that is what actually bends your mast. Now if you've got too much backstay, it's not so obvious on B rig, but on the A rig you'll see a whole series of creases coming in here. And apart from not, look, a few creases is not going to make you go slow, but some of them are just overdone. And the minute you see creases, you know you've overdone the backstay tension because it's put too much pre-bend in the mast, you can get rid of some of them by just pulling on the tack here with this little bowsy. But you don't really want that tight, because all that do is pull the draft to the front of the sail and flatten the sail. So you don't want big scallops between the eyelets. You want it just so that it's just those scallops are just taken out. Now, before we get on to kickers and the tensioning up of the mainsail and what have you, there's a couple of mistakes that people make when adjusting the boat. One is they normally have the jib luff too tight. Now, it's fixed at the top here. You cannot adjust it at the top. You can adjust the forestay length with this bowsy, which is fine to get the tension. But the amount of tension you got on the jib luff is on one of these two little bowsies down here. Now, which one is it? Well, I've got this little bowsy here very far back, and I've done that intentionally that I don't get it in the way. But what I've done on all my rigs is just put a little tape on here so that you know it's this particular one that adjusts your the tension here. You can slacken that off, because if you slacken that off, the jib boom comes up, the whole front sail goes slack, and it's a bit of a nightmare to put it all back together again. Okay, now the next thing you have to check is that your sheeting horse here is in the middle of your boat, and you want that little eyelet to be as close to the boom so that the sheeting goes through the eyelet and to the boom with a sort of horizontal dimension, sort of pushing in a horizontal. You don't want a big vertical component to that. And the only way to do that is when I'm sort of looking down the back here, I'm adjusting these bowsies on both sides so that it doesn't matter which tack it's on, that ring stays exactly in the same position relative to mast when you're sighting from behind. And then what I've done is I put a little drop of super glue on those bowsies here and on this forward one, and so it's not going to slip. I have found on numerous occasions on my boat and on other people's boats, sometimes, I don't know how it happens, I've had sheeting go under the bowsy here and tension it up. I've got, it's the old story, sheeting will always hook up if given half a chance. So take away that chance, just super glue it, and it's the same all around. Now, once you have a really strong backstay tension, how strong is strong? Well, you're going to have to find that out for yourself, because when I'm going to windward on B, C and D rig, I don't want a lot of forestay sag. I want this jib bar tight, because it helps, to me, when you get a crack, it helps accelerate the boat, and you don't want it flogging. If it's flogging, disaster. Now, on the A rig, it's a little bit different, because at the top end of A rig, you want a lot of forestay tension to tension that up, because simply, if you've got too slack a forestay, it makes it very difficult to tack the boat as well. The tighter that is, the better. So when you are setting up your rake from the front to the top, what I do is I rig it up like this, and if it's too far, when I set it up where everything is loose, there's no tension on the backstay, I pull on this bowsy to induce a little bit of forward rake at the top of the mast, and then I pull down on the backstay until I get the exact measurement. If I pull on the backstay and it's really tight, and the mast position is still too far forward, you slacken off a little bit of this and pull down on this, and you sort of play around with it until you get a really firm forestay tension here with a strong backstay, and there's no wrinkling in your sails. And you can tell when you've got things pretty balanced is that there's a very slight curvature in the mast which sort of mirrors the actual curvature on the luff of the sail. And if it's too much, well, if you look from behind here, you can see if I pull it on the backstay, let's get some wind in here. Wind's flopping around all over the show. But you see here, if I tension the forestay, all that does is open the top of the sail and it spills air at the top. And that brings me to another point, that if you're out there and you're getting overpowered, without adjusting the kicker, if you have to come into the shore quickly, you can just put a little bit of extra backstay on. It's going to spill off the top of the sail. It's going to help flatten the sail a little bit more because it's putting a little bit more bend into the mast. And that's what you want when you're getting overpowered. So sometimes people adjust the kicker to get the sail to twist off at the top. I will do that as well, but sometimes just a little bit on here will solve the problem. So now that you've got the tension on the backstay, the jib is nice and tight, you've got a really strong thing here so that when the wind blows you don't get the slot opening up too much. How do you know if the slot is open too much? When you're going to weather on a beat, up in this section of the sail, you'll notice it starts to flap. And that means you've got too much twist at the top of your sail. Okay? You can see the top's beginning to, this wind is swirling so much you can't really see it. But I'll try and do some videos with this on the water. So, now that you've got this all done, this is in the middle. Where do you put the end boom here? I never sail with the end boom further in than this back corner here. This back corner. I just find it stalls the boat. If in doubt, let it out. A little bit. Don't overdo it. Do things in small increments at a time. And you will find that, okay, so this is pointing to here. We've got the right tension. Now we've got to look at how much twist do we put on the sail. If you've got too much kicker, the sail's going to be flat. If you've got too much, it's going to be way open at the top here. It's going to be like this. So you've got to choose a point. Now, if you simulate what the wind looks like, just looking at that result there, to my mind, that's too much twist at the top. So I would take that down a little bit. And what is the measurement? Well, some people take measurements from the backstay to here. Yeah, I suppose you could do that. What I find is, find something that looks right and go sail it. If the boat is screwing up into the wind, you probably got too much kicker on, because with the correct mast rake, with the correct twist on the sail here, that you haven't got too much kicker, you haven't got too little kicker, the boat will sail itself to windward, and when a crack of wind comes, you can actually visibly see the boat sort of take a little leap forward. And then because the wind has increased in strength, it'll take a leap forward and then it'll slowly just gently lift up to the new apparent wind angle. And that's exactly what you want. You don't want it screwing up that you have to put rudder on to pull it off the wind. So I would probably go with that sort of mainsail setting to start with. Then the question comes, how much foot do we put on these sails here? And I've experimented, and to my mind, it doesn't really make a hell of a big difference that I can discern. I will later next year be doing wind tunnel tests with this rig and to actually quantify what are those differences, what produces the most drive. In very light winds on the A rig, yes, you would probably want more than, I've got like a, sort of like a finger and a bit. It depends how fat your finger is. Yes, you can use a tape measure. but something along those lines I would go with. The jib, I normally send a jib a little bit flatter than the main, because if you got too much curvature on here, all it's doing is taking that wind and pumping it into the back of the mainsail. As the wind that comes through the slot will hit the back of the mainsail a lot easier than if you've got a very straight, you can see there, that's a very straight run off the back sort of 2/3 of the sail. To me that's ideal. So this is quite a flat setting, could have a little bit more maybe. So the boom here points to this corner. Where should the jib boom go? I have tried all sorts of things, and to me 3 fingers works. Now what is 3 fingers? To me, I've got a little tape thing, and I can stick that tape thing in the back here, and it's exactly 50 millimeters. So I always sail with 50 millimeters offset on my jib boom on the A, B and C. A lot of people sail it with a little bit closer, but if you're sailing with it closer, you've got to induce more twist in the top of your sail, and personally I just don't like doing it. I don't think it helps to make the boat point any faster. To me, what you want when you're sailing is you want speed. When you've got speed, you can play around with height, you can do all sorts of things, and speed is king. And so I want to get up to speed, I don't want to pitch. There's tactical reasons why you might want to pinch someone and stuff them up with your backwinding coming off your sails to get them out of the way, to make them tack away. That's a different story, but you're only doing that for a specific purpose. When you're generally sailing, trying to get up the course as fast as you can, you want speed, and you want straight line speed. And when the boat is far away from you, you can't see what's happening on the luff of your sail. You've got to trust that your boat is actually hugging the wind as close as it can and sailing as fast as it can. And so you need to determine if it can do that at close range when you're testing it out with your settings. If you have to put any rudder on at all to hold the boat off the wind, 2 things. You've either got the sheeting boom here is too close, you've got too much tension on the leech of your sail, so you would loosen your sail off and just open up that slot at the twist at the top of your sail a little bit more. And the other thing is to check your jib slot here. Now here, when you've got wind on it, you can see the slot, and it's not very easy, and unfortunately this wind here is not really playing ball. But I could possibly add that up. Now what I've done here, just another small thing, is this little bowsy I put right down at the bottom here, that I can lift the boom and just pull down on the bowsy to get a new setting. Some people have put the bowsies up here. It's a disaster. Sorry to all the people that have done that. But you got to have a twist that's here on your jib that marries the twist on your sail, that this slot is reasonably consistent. Yeah, you can see that. 3 fingers, jib boom here pointing to here. And now the big question is, have I put too much kicker on or not? Well, there's a reasonable amount of twist on the back of the sail as you're doing that. Put it on the water and go and sail it. The boat begins to screw up and you've got to put rudder on. Give a little bit more twist. Just a little bit. Try it again. And all of a sudden you'll find your boat just powering itself to weather. You're not touching anything. Now obviously if you've got big chop on the water, or you've got big swells, yes, your rudder will come into play in those conditions, because the apparent wind alters up the face of a big swell. Chop on the water, you hit a chop head on, you've got to lean the bow off the wave as you come off the wave after you've hit it. Come off a little bit of lee rudder just to try and power the boat up a little bit more for the next chop. So there you will play with the rudder, but we're talking very small little increments. You're not slamming the rudder on, left and right as you go. So that's basically how I set up the boat. I'll be talking about more things inside here in another video. But the other thing is, if your boat leaks, there's only two things that can cause it to leak. One is the tape that you've got here on the hatch has not been put down properly and water's getting in, or you've got a crack in the hull somewhere. If there's a cup full of water in your boat, you've got a crack, or your hatch has come off. I use a sellotape tape here, which I'll be showing in some documentation that I'll be publishing later. And what's nice about this tape is it goes down and it doesn't leave a gungy, sticky residue when you pull it up. The tape that comes in the Josway kit is fantastic tape. It's really great. It sticks that hatch cover down beautifully and it works well. But I find when I lift it up, I've got to get some meths or benzene or something just to wipe down the deck here to get rid of that sticky residue. What I do here is I put the front piece on, I put the side pieces, and I just turn over the corners here so that when I want to get it up, I can get my finger underneath here and then lifts it up and it comes off beautifully. So yeah, this is what you're going to do. And the very next thing you do as you're about to put your boat on the water, and I see so many people who don't do this, is they don't check that their rudder is parallel to their fin. They put it on and then they wonder why the boat's falling off, and they're making sail adjustments, and it's an absolute disaster because nothing works. On the one leg they're screwing up, the next leg they're falling off. So you must eyeball the back of your rudder, make sure it is dead parallel to your fin. That's easy enough to do. Move your rudder on your transmitter stick backwards and forwards a few times. Check it again to make sure it's dead center. Then put your boat on the water. And the other thing is these little telltales that I've got on the sails here. Any big boat yachtsman can attest to the fact that they do have a place to play. Trouble is when the wind is really blowing and the B, C and especially the D suit, these things get wet very quickly and they stick to your sail and they're useless. But especially on the A-rig, where your sail will probably stay dry most of the day unless it's raining, and you're sailing in reasonably close proximity to your boat, they do help when you can see how they dance and they play around as to, you know, what your relative heading to the apparent wind is. And it can help you just lift up a little bit more to get on the wind so they're streaming nicely. And of course you have to understand that if it's the weather side that lifts or the leeward side that lifts, what does that mean? But those are subjects I'll be covering in another episode. So yeah, I hope this has made sense. I'm going to be doing some drawings to accompany this video, which will go through each of the things that I have mentioned, and I'll also be showing it with the different rigs. The other thing I have done, which can seriously affect your performance, not so much perhaps on the C and D rigs, but your little eyelet here with your sheeting that goes through here, I have actually super glued mine into position on the boom. I do not, and I repeat that, I do not recommend you do that if you're new, because you might have the relative position slightly wrong and the jib and the main boom don't go out at the right angles. And so get some expert help to get them in the right positions, and when they are in the right positions, you super glue them onto the boom so the little eyelet pipiki is pointing straight down, which means that no matter which tack you go on, it's exactly the same distance away from the mast. What has happened on all of my rigs in different conditions, obviously not so much in the case in a C and a D rig or even a B rig, but definitely on the A rig, is if there's not enough wind to swing that thing around the boom, it stays cocked over on the one side and so your sheeting angles are different on both tacks. So you've either got to take a little bit of water paper onto the boom to make it very free. I've done that. Eventually, I don't know what happens, it jams up again. So after nearly 2 and a bit years, I've got sick and tired of that happening, and I've just committed myself to a point where I know from experience in sailing it, that is the right position for when you're going downwind and you've got a goose wing and what have you. So that's all for now, and I hope I've covered enough topics and you're thoroughly bored, but there's a few pearls of wisdom there, and I hope you come right with them. Cheers.